Good morning, everybody. I know we want to get started. Welcome to the Fall SWOG Lung Committee meeting. Great to have everybody here. I just had some housekeeping items I wanted to remind everybody. We have some very active discussion in one of our other meetings yesterday, and I just want to remind everybody that this is a public meeting and that was a confidential meeting. We are all very friendly and we're friends here in the lung community, but what was discussed yesterday is considered confidential and embargoed information. So as you go out and go back to your institutions, I know a lot of us work in partnership with ECOG, Akron, Alliance, NRG. This is confident. That was confidential yesterday. So just it was asked to remind everybody about that. Which I should have said in the meeting today, but I'm just going to say I wanted to make sure and make a point of that today. The other thing is that just reminding everybody, as we discussed in our Board of Governors and Chairs meeting earlier today, that we all need to report our conflict of interest. And I do encourage you to review the conflict of interest strategy. We also just learned or were reminded of in the chairs meeting today, and so I was asked to look at our studies that I may be approaching some of you who have multiple ideas and multiple projects ongoing, that we really want to have as much equity and equality within the lung committee and all of our committees, and give lots of opportunities to different individuals. And I was asked to look at all our PI-ships and co-PI-ships across all of our studies and make sure that we're very balanced within that and are really setting up everybody for success. So more to come on that as it is continuing to evolve, but there are specific guidelines on that. All right, and with that, we'll move through the, what am I pointing at? Nothing? Okay, that went way far. Sorry about that. Okay, this is our agenda, otherwise very packed. Like I said, I'm going to try to do my best. I know a lot of you have flights to catch, and we're going to be lean and efficient. We're really excited also to have our keynote speaker with us here, Dr. John Haymock, as well as a distinguished panel that will be doing. I thought it'd be a little bit fun to do a debate of pro-con of perioperative IO versus adjuvant chemo IO. I think it's a pertinent and hot topic in lung cancer, and look forward to that debate as well as the panel discussion. We've been very active within the lung committee and also within LungMap, which is a large portion of what we do within the lung committee. And we have, this is just a sampling. We have more extensive data on this. We have abstracts that have been presented recently at ASCO as well as at World Lung. We also have many publications, one of which you will hear highlighted later today by Dr. Mary Redmond, that really speaks to one of the things that we focus on and one of our key pillars and actually specific aims within the lung committee, and that is really focused around DEI and representativeness on our clinical trials. And we also have a slew of publications that are in preparation. We're hoping that some of those get finished this year and that we can start getting those submitted. So just very, very active group. And as I mentioned, we had a very robust discussion yesterday about trials coming down the pipe, and we look forward to sharing those with you, hopefully at the spring meeting. All right, and with that, I believe Ms. Judy Johnson is joining us virtually.
Yes, good morning, everyone.
Perfect.
So here I am in St. Louis saying good morning to you, and you can go ahead and advance to the next slide, please, and the next.
If we can please, there we go, perfect.
All right, everything good?
Yes.
Okay, so here are the things that I'll be discussing briefly this morning. Move on to the next slide, please. Next slide, please. Can we go ahead? There we go. No, one more. Go back one. Thank you. So SWOG, we really do have the largest and most sophisticated patient advocate program in the NCTN, and our committee has earned the respect of SWOG leadership. We've got a seat at the table throughout the whole clinical trials lifecycle, starting with concept development into protocol development, accrual strategy, study implementation, and management. And we have two types of advocates, just to refresh your memory. Research advocates like me, who are your clinical trial experts, and community advocates who are the experts within their communities. Next slide, please. So we are having a big transition from our current leadership to new leadership in our Patient Advocate Committee. And at yesterday's plenary, Dr. Blanke bid fond farewells to Rick Bangs and Hildy Dillon, our current chair and co-chair, or vice chair, and then welcomed Barbara Segarra Vasquez and Anne Marie Mercurio, who will serve as our new co-chairs starting on Monday. So we're really fortunate to have had Rick and Hildy lead us through some great times and look forward to working with Barbara and Anne Marie. Next slide, please. So at our spring meeting, I polled lung committee members who develop and implement trials to determine how involved they are with me as their advocate. So the good news is that 87% of you are fully engaged, are often engaged. That leaves 13% who are rarely or not engaged. So my goal is to get that 13% down to 0. At our Patient Advocate Committee meeting this Wednesday, Dr. Don Dyson, Dr. Blanke, and Dr. Hirschman shared their vision that advocates collaborate with SWOG members from the very beginning to develop trials that are inclusive and accessible to everyone. Their mission reflects our goals as patient advocates. All you have to do is ask. Next slide, please. So what did the poll show is the 2 top most valuable advocate contributions? You can see here what the big winner is. Identifying barriers to patient interest and ability to participate in and complete a trial. And coming in second, providing feedback on the relevance of the trial question to the patient. It's clear from these responses that without knowing the patient needs, interests, and barriers at the very beginning, concepts might as well not even be brought forward. Incorporating the patient voice into the concept development process from day one can be a springboard for successful design, implementation, and accrual by offering studies that patients want to participate in and can participate in and complete. Next slide, please. For those who aren't yet engaged or rarely engaged, why aren't you? Well, here's what you said. 67% don't have an established relationship and 27% aren't sure how to get started. Well, it's really simple. Just ask me. We can figure it out together. Email me with an idea or ask me a question on how we can get started. Next slide, please. We can gain the patient perspective in a lot of ways, including collaborating with lung cancer advocacy groups like these. Last summer, the LungMap Accrual Enhancement Committee collaborated with Friends of Cancer Research to host a webinar. Panelists included Dr. Jay Nyack, representing a community hospital, and 3 patient advocates from KRAS kickers, EGFR resistors, and longevity. Patient panelists told us what they want, for us to involve them from the get-go. They want us to ask them what they think of new concepts. Well, we've moved forward on that request. LungMap leadership will invite a representative from GoTo to an upcoming call to pave the way for this collaboration. The Lung Community Engagement Subcommittee will invite an advocacy organization rep to talk to us about what they do and how they help patients learn about clinical trials. Next slide, please. So moving forward, let's keep our level of collaboration high and go even higher. For those who aren't yet engaged, just ask me. Our community advocates are a great resource and are eager to help. All we have to do is ask them. Advocacy organizations want to help us develop patient-centered concepts and trials. We will ask them. Lucy Gansauer, our committee's DEI champion, has been a great help. Just ask her for her ideas on how your concepts can be more inclusive in diverse communities. We all have a common goal. Ensure that SWOG lung trials are inclusive and accessible to all who want to participate, no matter what they look like, where they live, or what their financial circumstances are. Next slide. So I want to thank you all for all that you do to help patients. I really appreciate collaborating with all of you, and I look forward to more of the same. Thank you so much.
Judy, that was great. This is Roy. If any of us have advocates in our communities that want to get involved, how can we put them in touch with you? I know we have some people in Connecticut.
Just give them my email.
Okay, so for everyone here, it's great to create local advocates and people at your site, and training can be important.
Thank
We
you so much,
also,
Roy.
fantastic. And Judy, I know you're not here, but we do have the new heads of our patient advocacy committee. If they want to stand up, please. We can
Oh, great.
recognize them, please. And thank you guys so much for joining us today. All right, I think we'll move on now. So Dr. Eric Tolosa is going to be giving us an update on thoracic surgery, and he's coming from.
And while he comes up, anyone online who wants to ask a question, just put it in the chat and then I'll ask it for you.
Good morning. All right. So I'm going to give you an update of the thoracic surgery subcommittee. We met 2 days ago with the radiation oncology committee as well. So there are mainly 3 or 4 SWOG supported clinical trials. There are no currently SWOG trials itself, but we have a couple concepts in early development by Henry Park of Yale and Jay Kim of City of Hope. But of the current SWOG supported trials, we have Alchemist, and so the first part is the screening portion, and that's accruing very well. If a patient is found to be ALK positive, they're then offered to go into the E4512 Alchemist trial, which is crizotinib versus observation. Apologize, I didn't get my updated slides in time to be included, so these are from the spring meeting. But for the E4512, there's currently 18 patients registered, and 2 of which were added in the last 6 months. If a patient, so this is the schema. So if the patient has had a resection that is non-squamous, and then they're offered standard of care adjuvant treatment, afterwards they're then tested for EGFR and ALK, and if they're ALK positive, they're placed into an ALK crizotinib versus observation randomization. For non-squamous patients who do not get adjuvant therapy, they're then tested, and if they're ALK positive, they go into the crizotinib versus observation randomization. If they're neither EGFR or ALK positive, then they go into an immunotherapy arm. For squamous patients, they are not offered adjuvant treatment. Instead, they get PD-L1 testing, and then they go into an immunotherapy arm. And as I mentioned, there's 18 patients registered to date, with 2 in the last 6 months. I'm just going to skip this. So this is the schema again for patients who are ALK positive, and they get randomized into crizotinib versus observation. And this there's now 18 patients on here. For patients who are EGFR or ALK negative, they then get randomized into a platinum doublet with pembro versus platinum doublet by itself, and then they get either with or without post-op radiation, and then pembro afterwards for 16 cycles. So far, there are 67 patients enrolled, with 11 in the last 6 months. This is the accrual as of last year, but I wanted to mention that for SWOG, there have been 2 enrolled each month for the last 12 months, as well as the last 6 months and the last 3 months. And so we're contributing about 20 to 25% of the enrollment to this trial. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tolosa. So we know that one of the things we've asked is for our surgical subcommittee and our radiation oncology subcommittee, because there's a lot of overlap and dialogue between the two groups, they're now having committee meetings together. So if anybody's interested in that, please do reach out. Don't hesitate to reach out to Dr. Tolosa. Henry Park is here. He's going to be stepping in for Dr. Megan Daly to see if you want to become more involved. And as they mentioned, that we do have some concepts in development. They've been doing a lot of great work together. And I see that we have a question.
Yes, it seems like, thank you. It seems like the Alchemist trial provides an opportunity to look at a question I had posed a couple years ago about geographic variation in targetable mutations. Is Alchemist accruing from all across the country?
Yes, yes, absolutely. And actually, Ray, do you want to, you did a lot of the initial analysis and your team helped with a lot of the data. I don't know if you can speak to that. So, yeah, so the umbrella protocol of Alchemist, right? Patients get molecularly profiled and they have a lot of information. And as I said, Ray and his group at Memphis have been very key in analyzing and annotating that data.
Yeah, so what we did was we looked at the patients who didn't qualify for a treatment trial. And we looked at, essentially what we did was look at the quality of surgery. And it was no surprise to me, but it seemed to be a surprise to everybody. It was poor and quite heterogeneous. In terms of the question you asked about geographic distribution of mutations, we haven't looked at that yet, but that's one of the things that will be done.
Right.
Observation that in 6 years of treating lung cancer in Wyoming, I have not had a single patient with a targetable mutation.
And you are testing?
I am testing.
Yeah. Well, I've had people in Mississippi say the same thing, but when we have looked, it turns out it's not true. Yeah.
I mean, this offers the opportunity to tell for sure.
Yeah.
You must have very low pollution.
And just to add to Dr. Gray's comments, we are recruiting for more surgeons to become members of the subcommittee. So far, there's mainly 4 of us, myself, Dan Raz and Jay Kim from City of Hope, and Barry Gibney from South Carolina. So if you know anyone who would like to be a member of our subcommittee, please forward their names. Our next Zoom meeting will be on December 8th. So we'd like for them to join us.
You know, as long as you're up there, if we're going to do the INSIGHT trial, which we will, we're going to need, some of the new trials that are going to be in the adjuvant, neoadjuvant space, if we do a trial. Like, come on, though. We need surgeons. It's going to be critical. The surgeons are going to be they're always important. But now in the neoadjuvant, adjuvant setting, this is where the decisions will be made at the multimodality tumor board. So I think every site should have someone from surgery that's key and engaged in, my site included, we need to find someone who's going to be at these meetings because that's going to be critical.
Yes, and these studies that we have in early development, they involve borderline resectable patients. So we need surgeons to discuss what borderline really means.
Yes, great. Thank you for that, and thank you both. All right, and so we'll have Dr. Park give us the radiation oncology subcommittee update.
All right, thanks very much. All right, so as you heard already, we had a very productive subcommittee meeting now, which is combined between radiation surgery and locally advanced now, which is led by Dr. Daly, Dr. Tolosa, and Dr. Goldberg. So we're really having some good discussions there. And our next call, as you've seen, is over on December 8th, and really everyone is welcome to join from all disciplines. Subcommittee goals include identifying areas of need within the radiation and surgery spaces and to develop high-impact trials within these areas. We're also hoping to promote accrual to active SWOG and SWOG-endorsed trials in radiation and surgery. All right, so here, as you can see from the radiation trials that we have open, both within SWOG as well as outside, they're filling lots of spaces within the non-small cell and small cell space. So here from Maverick trial S1827, which is led by Chad Rustoven and Paul Brown. The accrual is really picking up quite well now. We're actually at 182 is what I last heard from this trial. So the rate is really going up. This is PCI versus no PCI in the setting of MRI surveillance in both limited stage and extensive stage small cell lung cancer. There's been some recent articles as well as some recent presentations from Astro about how there really may be a benefit here to hippocampal sparing whole brain for PCI. So I think that's something that you can do either standard or hippocampal sparing depending on your preference and your patient's preference, but hopefully that'll lead to more patients wanting to be on this trial as well. The NRG S1914 by Dr. Daly and also Dr. Simone over at NRG is also really picking up pace quite a bit. The iSaber study was published recently in The Lancet a couple months ago and showed in the phase 2 study that there may be a benefit to immunotherapy combined with SBRT. So this one is not placebo-controlled, unlike some of its other trials in this space. It's only 6 months of immunotherapy, which is also the shortest overall regimen of immunotherapy. So you get 2 cycles first of immunotherapy, and then SBRT along with the immunotherapy, and then you get afterwards as well. And the control arm is just SBRT alone. So the accrual now is around 260 out of 480, so really over halfway through and really picking up pace with about 12 per month now. 1933. Now accrual is also picking up, or they're about two-thirds of the way through now. This is the hypofractionated radiation, 60 gray and 15 fractions, and it's a single arm followed by having immunotherapy afterwards. This is for stage 2 patients who have ECOG 0 to 2, or for stage 3 patients with ECOG 2 status. So this is our third trial that we have open at SWOG that is radiation related. So please continue accruing to this as well. And just for the champion studies briefly, LU002 is still on temporary closure. This is for oligometastatic disease for consolidated radiation. LU007 Raptor study. This one is looking for extensive stage small cell lung cancer patients, and once they get their chemo and immunotherapy, to afterwards to either be administered immunotherapy alone or to add consolidated radiation therapy, not just to the thorax, but up to 5 disease sites overall. This is also picking up accrual now, almost at 60 patients overall out of 138 in the phase 2 component. And then the other thing to note is that you can actually get double credit for enrolling on Maverick and this. So for patients with extensive stage disease who don't have brain mets up front, you can randomize to PCI or no PCI, and you can randomize to consolidated radiation versus no consolidated radiation. This is the EA5181. This is unresectable stage 3 non-small cell lung cancer, accruing very well, and it's almost done accruing. As you can see here, 611 out of 630, which was really up from even 6 months ago from the 500, low 500 range. So this probably should be done within the year. This is the Alliance study for the PD-L1 negative patients, either looking at systemic therapy alone versus systemic therapy plus SBRT. This accrual is now at 31 out of 100. LU006 is accruing a little bit slower for mesothelioma for looking at pleural IMRT in the context after PD. Thank you very much.
Great, perfect. Thank you very much. All right, we'll invite Dr. Phil Mack to come give us an update on translational medicine.
There we are. So I thought for this session I'd give you an update on one of our older studies, SWOG0424. And if you don't remember this study, that's okay. You're probably way too young. This was, in fact, launched 20 years ago. I suppose theoretically you could be so old that it slipped out of your memory.
It started planning 4 years before that.
Yep. But this at the time was a very seminal study, and it still has a lot of relevant data that I'll discuss a little bit. Here you can see some of the instigators. This was actually born from an RR1 study. Dr. Christine Ambersoni and Regina Santel, along with Kathy Albain, who's here. You can see the hypothesis is centered around risks associated with lung cancer, both from a tobacco carcinogen metabolism point of view, as well as hormones and reproductive questions. And they were generally divided into tumor-specific markers that we knew at the time, estrogen receptor, polymorphisms associated with steroidogenesis, and demographics, a whole lot of demographics. This was associated with a massive, massive questionnaire that collected all of this information. The original goal was to deliberately accrue male never smokers, male ever smokers, female never smokers, and female ever smokers. So breaking up into categories of smoking and gender at the ratios that you can see there at the top. However, one thing that proved to be too much of a challenge was to accrue male never smokers. We just could not find them back in the day. They're not quite as rare as unicorns, but they did not want to go on the study and could not be found. So we ended up actually keeping the study open for a lot longer than we expected in order to try to accrue to this population. So you can see that we over-accrued to the other groups, but not to the male never smokers. Now this study ended up running from 2005 to 2011. And over the time, a number of modifications were made. The key ones are listed here. The accrual goals I just mentioned. But we also added EGFR mutation status, which was not known when the grant was actually conceived. Survival analysis was added. And it turned out that adducts and polymorphisms in this case series just simply weren't going to be productive. And we can talk about that later for the reasons behind that. So those were dropped. So in 2010, we put this ASCO abstract out, which detailed the molecular findings, bearing in mind that the study was still ongoing. And so we're still short on some of the never smokers. And it showed basically all the things that you expected to see in these populations, looking at EGFR and KRAS relative to smoking. So, and I'm not going to dwell on that because we all know that. But KRAS mutations had not really been ingrained into the collective zeitgeist back in the day. And so some of that information I thought was pretty interesting. We know it now, but obviously we saw very strong associations with KRAS mutations by histology and by smoking. And one of the things I was personally fascinated in was sort of the distribution of the actual point mutations, because we know that smoking induces a lot of G to T transversions, which actually account for the first two most common types of amino acid substitutions in KRAS. You can see from the base substitution column there, Gs to Ts, which makes them far more common in lung cancer than they are in, say, pancreatic cancer or colorectal. And so we had noted this association, not that we were the first to do it, but it really contributed to the literature, I suppose, at the time, as an ASCO publication. We did see that the G to T transversions were prominent in smokers, and other groups such as the G to A was prominent in never smokers. Now, subsequent to this, somewhere around 2012 or so, our good colleague Tomoyo Kawaguchi in Japan has started to put together his own version of this study. And you can see from the abstract there, I highlighted the important parts. This is built deliberately and specifically to recapitulate the 0424 data in Japan, as you can see from the bolded comments. And he used the same version of the questionnaire, translated obviously into Japanese. And in a typical efficient fashion, they actually got this completed and done in about 4 years. And so actually had this publication that came out in 2016, as well as a few minor publications as well. And you can see the conclusions there. So the main publication had not been published, and that ASCO abstract I had pushed at the time for, we should publish this data. But the prevailing wisdom at the time, and I didn't disagree with it, was that it needs to all be packaged together in one big paper. And that would have the most impact. And if we sort of publish little separate elements of it, even important ones like mutation distribution, would lessen the impact. But in a little bit of rebellion, Dr. Ambersoni's group went ahead and published their hormone receptor data that came out of the study, and that's what you're looking at here. And that was 2018. So this brings us more closer to the modern era, where you can see the actual current data set. And again, the original, you can see the original accrual goals, the modified, and then the final evaluated data set and what we intend to do with it. And there are a number of interesting associations that Mary's team has worked on over the years, different statisticians. You can see that here we're looking at the correlations between the mutations that we did and various parameters, such as EGFR is more common in female, significantly less common in smokers, etc. And there's a number of other associations that we expected to see and did see with KRAS and P53 based on essentially smoking. And here are the Kaplan-Meier curves for the survival. In that kind of weird orangey color are females, and the blue color are males. And the dotted lines you can see are the smokers. And so you can see that no matter whether they're smoking or not, women are outperforming men in every sense. Their survival is just simply better. Here's sort of an adjusted projected model that also takes into account a number of the prognostic factors associated with these groups. And you can see it kind of normalizes it out, but it shows essentially the same thing, but in a stage-dependent way. So what can we learn from this type of study? Bear in mind this was a case study. It was heavily criticized by epidemiology review committees because we didn't have a control group, which is why the polymorphisms were a little challenging to analyze. So we cannot assign risk in any situation here. We cannot say that factor X was associated with the chance of lung cancer. All we can do here is compare between those four groups. And the associations, we're almost done here, the associations were very interesting. So for instance, and this is not at all representative of the entire data set, but never smokers were more likely to have a household income greater than $50,000, the cutoff we were using at the time. They're more likely to be college educated, have a professional administrative position. They were very much more likely to have other healthy lifestyle choices. And then we can litigate what it means to have less exposure as a child, because what does it mean to have tobacco smoke exposure when you probably started smoking when you're 15, you're doing it to yourself. And among women, there were a number of hormonal and reproductive issues that were different between smokers, including the use of birth control. And that made it a particularly challenging type of data to really kind of get into and assign causality. And I'm well aware that this type of argument was exactly what the tobacco lobby people had mounted. This is from 1994, where you can see the tobacco execs swearing that their grandmothers aren't Satan or whatever they're doing there. And but what they're arguing at the time, of course, is that it's not smoking that causes cancer, it's the lifestyle choices of smokers. And we had to wait for the molecular biology to come in to prove the obvious here. But nevertheless, their argument is not without merit. There are a lot of associations between these groups. Now, finally, here it shows the modeling associations with risk of death. And the bottom line here is that no matter what we look at, smoking, everything else, women just seem to do better. They outperform men in terms of survival. And that's the bottom line of the study. I'm sorry, what was that? So you're not surprised by it.
Yes.
You're right.
I didn't say it.
Yes, women are tougher. I think that's our basic hypothesis that surrounds all of this. So anyway, I want to thank the people past and present that have been involved in this, and we will get this the final big manuscript published. There have been a lot of statisticians that have been involved over the years. Mary has been a constant, but this actually started with John Crowley, who was the PI at the time. And I do want to point out, by the way, these green slides I actually took from about 2008 or so, the green backgrounds. But I do want to point out the third one under the SWOG Lung Committee, Carrie Chansky, who was seminally involved in this at the day, because for some reason she magically reappeared yesterday back into our consciousness, summoned, I think, psychically to help us get this study completed, or to complete her penance in SWOG. Anyway, please say hello to Carrie. She was absolutely valuable, and she's back now. And with that, sorry I ran over, but I thank you for your time.
No, this is great.
I have a question.
Question or snark?
First of all, we are very thrilled to have you back, Carrie. So wasn't there a group that didn't in Pittsburgh have a spore project for a number of years where they were looking at this? I don't know, Gil Siegfried. But my thought is now, in this era of big data and AI and, try to find other data sets, this is probably going to need, much larger numbers and newer techniques to try to sort something out here.
Yeah.
Right, but clearly I think that's
So to that end, the questionnaire is fantastic and has a lot of information in it. One problem that is plaguing me all this time in terms of a modern publication is the fact that we had done the molecular analysis contemporary to the study, which is before next generation sequencing.
exactly.
So we were using some pretty old standards at the time. The data was good and it showed the associations, but it would not have been as clean and crisp as we would see now. It took us a very long time to do it, and it only included a few mutations. And so that would be the limiting factor. There may, as it turns out, be some tissue that is secretly hidden away at Roswell Park that we might be able to get our hands on. So it's possible we can do some reanalysis. Okay, Lucky, snarky comment or observation?
No, it's a comment. So thank you, Phil, for bringing this back to the floor. It's really a remarkable study that SWOG had done. No, I just wanted to emphasize that the Japanese molecular epidemiology study, which, as you mentioned, was done really as a mirror study to 0424, is now being approached like a common arm analysis. Mary is leading that. David had introduced that concept of having a common arm between our studies. So we've done it with therapeutic trials. Here's a molecular epidemiology trial where a common arm, in this case, common questionnaires, common data collection, was implemented. And we're now in the process of actually doing that comparative analysis. And so I don't know if Mary would like to speak to it, but she's going to Japan in a couple of months to be able to work it out and finally do that publication after the parent publication comes out.
Yeah, any comments? This is a collaboration that we have really enjoyed over the years. And we've always been looking forward to doing this kind of in-depth analysis comparing their population to ours. There's obviously been 100% Asian, which makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to make one first comment that I think hopefully we'll have our manuscript completed very soon. And Dr. Albane has done an absurd amount of work on this because going through all of that data, as you mentioned, all of those questionnaire data in particular is super complex. And so I think it's shaping up really nicely. So something that no matter what, it's going to be valuable. Yes. Yes. And actually there were a couple. Yeah, Amy Dark, and actually even we had some other people. I mean, there's more.
Sorry, other people.
But no, that's okay. But yeah, we do have a call that's going to be. Did we set the date? It's in November.
Yes.
Yes, and so we're super excited about that. So the joint analysis with the Japanese group with Dr. Kawaguchi and his team. There are some things I don't remember off the top of my head that are coming out to be kind of interesting. There's a lot more to do. So
right, and obviously we wanted to try and relate this study to some of the more modern era understanding of the etiology of EGFR mutations and such. But the questionnaire didn't, as it turned out, capture that. But to Mary's point, and to all the work that Kathy has done, that questionnaire was extraordinarily involved. And the data that I just showed is just one tiny snippet of all of it. It's a lot of analyses that's involved. It's very complicated to try and sort it out. So
We're running way over time here. I love all the discussion. Sorry, John, we're gonna take one more question and then we really have to move on, guys. Yeah.
Very quickly, there's another paper yet in that questionnaire.
Okay.
Someone to take that.
Oh, perfect. Wonderful to know.
Yeah,
One more
I just-
question.
Very quick, for small cell lung cancer, we were approached like to do some similar study with the gender equity, smoking, sort of like the intensity of smoking, especially with the recent data coming from Asian, that they had 20% non-smokers in a small cell lung cancer study. But we were told that because of pharma, of course, and the support, it's very difficult to do so. So I wanted to know, is it something that we just how can we bring it on board for other studies if they want to do a subset to look into epidemiologic.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and why don't we take that question offline? I think that's probably a longer discussion than we can handle just right now in this moment. But good point. I think the point here is that what are the lessons learned, and how do we build this out further across other data sets?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. No worries at all. All right, thank you. Fantastic. Who knew something from 2004 would be so invigorating? So thank you for waking us all up this morning. All right, so we'll move on now to Dr. Paul Hesketh to give us the community engagement core update, and he's going to talk a little bit about DEI also, as he and Lucy have worked very closely together on a lot of these efforts, and we really want to complement them.
Good morning, everyone. So I just advanced the big one. Oh, that's simple. So I'll try to move through this quickly to try to give back a little bit of time to the group. So our community engagement subcommittee has remained very active, and I just want to give you a brief update. So again, just to give you a sense, this was a subcommittee that was formed originally under Karen Kelly's leadership about 5 years ago. And really, it was trying to enhance the mission of the Lung Committee in terms of getting a greater outreach to community-based sites. And as you can see, the responsibilities here are quite, they start really from trial development process through the maturation of the concept, and I think very, very important, try to identify potential barriers that the trial may have as it moves into activation, and then really champion the trials once they're up and running within the community. And we have monthly calls that are really very, very, I think, interesting and productive. So again, we've sort of gradually had to expand our membership, and with the number of trials coming down the pike, Janelle, I think we may have to expand our membership even more because the Lung Committee has been extraordinarily active. So we also have a larger group in addition to the actual formal committee, which we call the Community Oncology Support Group. And these are other individuals that are based in the community that really participate in our monthly calls and really provide very, very important input. They don't have the same set of expectations with regard to responsibilities, but they really serve as a very useful group to provide feedback and input. So ongoing activities, again, as I mentioned, we're involved in every step of protocol activation. We have monthly meetings, and we're working in collaboration with this lung oncology support group. And I think very importantly, what we've done really over the past year is to try to extend invitations to PIs that are developing trials to participate in our monthly meetings, or in this case, Ann Chang presented a concept at our in-person meeting. And it's been, I think, very, very helpful to the PIs to get real-world feedback as they develop the concept and consider their formal submission. We also have had an incredibly effective partnership with the MedNet, and I think also very importantly and very constructively recently, we've had involvement with our DEI initiatives within the Lung Committee. So I think that one of the things that we did was to really, again, try to provide feedback as concepts are moving to TMSC submission. And so this was a concept that Dr. Al-Jamali was presenting, and he had presented it to our committee and really wanted input prior to the submission. And we tried to actually get the input more general. We don't typically have thoracic surgeons as part of our group, but in this case, we actually extended our survey to include local thoracic surgeons at the sites where our members were. And so we actually received input from 10 sites. And basically, we found that 9 of those centers would choose to participate in the study as proposed. And 3 centers, again, this was a trial looking at, and I think we'll hear about it later, adjuvant versus perioperative therapy. 3 of the centers would have some concerns about enrolling single station N2 patients. But I think the general sense is that this trial was important and that there was general support among our community sites for this study. And I think we actually got that information, I think, to Dr. Al-Jamali, I think within 24 hours of his TMC. We were trying very hard, but he had that information before he had to make his presentation, which was our goal. So we also have had an incredibly productive partnership with the MedNet. I have to give Liza Henry an incredible amount of credit and her colleagues at the MedNet. This is an incredible forum that can really get information out there very quickly and very, very importantly, get feedback in an incredibly fast fashion if you put questions out there. And they've been partnering with us with a number of the lung trials, which I think has been very, very helpful. And you can see the reach that they have. Basically, it reaches many, many physicians. Many people are viewing this. I suspect many of you probably have it and are getting these emails. And also they're able to have surveys that really can get real-time feedback, which has been extremely helpful. So Pragmatica, obviously, I think is very near and dear to our hearts and is really, I think, a paradigm-changing trial that I think is critically important. And so we've been focusing on outreach for this trial because this seemed to be a prime candidate for the community oncology community engagement subcommittee to be involved in. So we've been trying to raise awareness about the novel design and impact. We've been trying to understand barriers. We've been basically, we will be partnering with the MedNet to do a Q&A to try to get the word out there and find out how people feel about that study. I think that basically, again, we're still talking about the MedNet. The MedNet will continue to support trials in development and continue with its polls as well. So in terms of the Pragmatica trial, I have to give an extraordinary amount of credit to Lucy Gansauer. She is our lung committee DEI champion and is really someone that is always pushing me very nicely and very well. And I think we're working very well together. And she has involved in a very important, I think, outreach activity with sites within her geographic locale that really have a very large African-American population, and I think is seeing results in terms of trying to increase accrual. And so she's done an enormous amount of outreach on a personal site, on a personal status, and has enlisted me in terms of talking to these groups as well, which I think has been great. So you can see that we particularly have been interested in the Southeast NCORS, and you can see again the number of sites that we're talking about. And amazingly, I was able to talk to a group that has 75 sites of activity, the SCORE site, back in September. And I think the trial was received very, very well, and we're hopeful that those sites will activate the trial. So again, a lot of outreach, and I think hopefully this will be bearing fruit. So that was my last slide. Again, I thank all of those that are on the community, on the committee and in our support group for their involvement. I thank Lucy for her help. I thank Janelle for her incredible support of our activities. And I put an appeal out there now, and I do this at every meeting, that if there are individuals that have an interest in getting involved, we would like to expand the scope of our support group, because I think the larger the number of individuals we have that we're getting feedback from, the more valuable that input's going to be. So if people have a specific interest, that's my email. Please feel free to approach me or send me an email. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Any comments, questions? I think what you're hearing today across all of these committees is that we hope that you go back to your institutions, engage your faculty, and there's multiple opportunities depending on their interest as to how to get engaged within SWOG. So we look forward to hearing from everyone.
Right, and we just have a comment from the chat, which I'm monitoring, from Xiao Hong. The VA committee has also recommended to open this study. I assume they're talking about Pragmatica across all the VA sites. So that's a big strength we have, the VINs and the VA. So excellent.
And I don't know, is Cheryl here? We have a VA liaison. Oh, there she is. Hi, Cheryl. I don't know if you want to come up and say some words sorry, put you on the spot, sort of, kind of warned you about this yesterday, but so we really recognize that one of the opportunities we have, is we've made a lot of strides with accruing Black patients on Pragmatica. We have some opportunities across Hispanic Latinx populations, and we're working with Lucy and Frank on that, as well as with our VA. And so Cheryl, help me with your last name, because your name tag was not right yesterday, but
So Cheryl Serlanis from Heinz VA.
perfect.
And we are working in the VA system on opening this study. We work within our Navigate Consortium, which is a group of VA sites that are trying to increase enrollment in VA studies, but also with all of our VA sites, we're working on outreach to make sure that the sites can open the study. And we did talk about it at our VA committee meeting, and it was well received. And we talked about some barriers to overcome and how to do that. So Dr. Gray and I met as well with some plans to move forward. So thanks.
Thanks. For you or Lucy or Paul, Hispanic, I always notice the Hispanic accrual is like 1% or less in all trials across the country. And we were once Southwest Oncology. Why don't we have more? Are you going to talk about that, Lucy?
Well, our statistical group did a fabulous job of figuring out how many non-small cell lung cancers. So while we look at that percentage nationally of the U.S. population, the non-small and Hispanic is only 5.1.
Right.
So the bar that we need to reach, now that population is aging, so that data will increase. But LungMap did 2.4. So when you compare it to some of our other underrepresented groups, it's not that bad. And you may speak more, but the data that they mined, we have to really understand what the denominator is. And
I completely agree with you,
Yes.
Lucy, and we do this also within our core grant, right? I mean, in the state of Florida, we have a very large, obviously Hispanic Latinx population. And when you look at that demographic and across the United States, that population tends to be much younger, and therefore they're not the cancer population. So it is your denominator matters. It's a conversation I've had with Mary and Reha even about their recent publication, so thank you for that. And speaking of that publication, I'm going to ask Mary to come on up here.
I'll make one comment while she's
yeah.
coming up. The Community Engagement Committee has been spoken about from other committees at SWOG because it's really a best practice example of how to ensure that trials are going to be palatable in the community and doable. So I think you're going to see more committees formed here.
Agreed. I mean, I think Dr. Hesketh has done an outstanding job, and I mentioned this in a chairs meeting today. I want to compliment Dr. Hesketh, Lucy, Judy, and Frank DeSanta from our communications team, just really the dream team that helps us execute these clinical trials and really improve our representativeness. And with that, I'll hand it off to Dr. Redmond.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Good morning. So for those of you who've been around for a while, you remember that it was about 10 years ago that we started talking about the LungMap trial. The LungMap trial opened to accrual in June of 2014. We had our kickoff meeting for LungMap in March of 2013. And one of the major objectives when we were planning the study, and the we I'm talking about would include Vali Papadimitriou, Roy Herbst, David Gandera, and our partners at Friends of Cancer Research, Foundation for NIH, the NCI, FDA. And the major goal of LungMap was not only to establish an infrastructure to be able to evaluate biomarker-driven therapies in patients with squamous cell lung cancer at the time who'd been previously treated with platinum chemotherapy, and now it's all non-small cell lung cancers. It was also to be able to bring, as I think Roy and Ellen and other people would say, bring the treatments to the patients. So establish this infrastructure so that sites all over the country could offer targeted therapies and genomic screening to their patients, and that wasn't necessarily a standard of care. And as part of that, the goal was not just to offer it to lots of different people, but to, in fact, enroll a more representative patient population into a study that was evaluating biomarker-driven therapies. And so as we went forward, and recently you've probably all seen some of the publications and press releases from the FDA saying, hey, industry, you guys need to do a better job of enrolling a more representative patient population in your studies. And we were having all these different conversations. And so at some point in the last couple years, the natural question was to ask, how are we doing in lung map? Did we actually achieve our goal to enroll a more representative patient population? And some of these conversations were in part these, like, why should industry consider doing a study within lung map or even just the NCTN in general when they could do the study themselves? And so we did this analysis, and I was wanting to do this, and Riha Vaidya is a faculty member at Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center with me and part of the SWOG Statistical Center, and her background is in health economics. And so in talking with Riha, and then also Joe Unger, who's another faculty member who does health disparities work as well, we determined that we wanted to look at this question in lung map, and we didn't want to just look at race, ethnicity, and age, but we wanted to look at something more broad. And so Riha, with her health economics background, also wanted to look at using zip codes. We could look at rural versus urban location and also health disparity index, because it's not, as we understand, representativeness and disparity is not just about what you look like, but also where you live and what your health life situation is. And so I'm just really proud to show, thank you, Janelle, for putting this up here, that on the, I guess on the right-hand side, you've got the cover page for the paper that we just had published in the last year in July in JCO Precision Oncology, showing that in the lung map trial, not only did we do a better job of enrolling patients of slightly older age relative to other lung trials, and the matching closer to what we see in the SEER database. We enrolled more Black participants than you see in other settings in the lung map trial. Because the majority of lung map was squamous to start out with for the first, from 2014 to 2019. We do have more males than the generalized lung cancer population, but as we move forward into the more non-small cell full bucket, we're going to be doing a better job of having representation by male versus female representation. But we also did do a better job in terms of enrolling more rural participants and also people with different oh God, my brain just went in the middle of my sentence here. Did a better job of in terms of rural, that area deprivation index. So there's just a lot to be proud of with lung map, and this paper I think is a great example of that. And then later we saw this amazing, I think it's reasonable to say amazing, editorial, and I can't read it from here, but and I'm hopeful that some of you can, but I think if you haven't read it, you should. And some of the things that they said are exactly what we wanted to say. That the last paragraph, the last sentence of the first paragraph basically says, we need to do a better job. The FDA wants us to do a better job of enrolling a more representative patient population. And the Lung Cancer Master Protocol and our paper demonstrates a way forward to accomplish this. So, and I think that I'm going to take a step back again and say this is because of the National Clinical Trials Network that the National Cancer Institute set up, 50, 60 years ago. And one of the major objectives of the NCTN is to enroll patients that are representative in trials that are representative of people with the disease. And so it's because of that infrastructure and it's because of the intentions behind the NCI, then followed by the NCTN groups, that we were able to accomplish something along these lines. So I'll finish there.
Congratulations. Really tremendous work.
So, just that's wonderful. And I remember when Mary first had, and the team presented that at one of our lung map meetings. Is there a question?
No, you keep talking.
What I want to say is that the social determinants of health and the way that this is addressing it is so critical, and it's critical for cancer centers, and well, it's for all of us. But this is why this trial really needs to be open in almost every cancer center, the lung map trial. And one of the things that we're concerned about is that cancer centers only open a couple of the sub-studies. We really have to open all of them to make it work, and we're going to be putting out some announcements about that pretty soon. But it's a no-brainer because you've got a trial that accrues in the community. It's exactly what the NCI is. That's the #1 scoring criteria right now on NCI grants.
Great. Dr. Rosen?
Yeah, so NCTN, but within that, I think we need to make sure we give the proper shout out to the
NCORPs, yep.
Yes,
Agreed.
because that is the deliberate infrastructure that is trying to create access and is trying to teach us to remember to go where the patients are.
Yes.
And Joe Unger, you mentioned, he's done a lot of work. And one of the things he has done is he has looked at the real reasons why patients don't get into clinical trials. It's not what we think, that they don't want to get into clinical trials. It's that the vast majority of the time, the places these people go to have no clinical trials infrastructure. And the second most common reason is that when we design our trials, we're looking for triathletes who have lung cancer. There are not that many out there. So we set these eligibility criteria so stringent that the majority of the people who will have the disease we're interested in don't qualify for our trials. So at least the part we have direct control over is to think carefully as we're designing our trials to keep them simple enough to where the people who need to get in those trials can get those clinical trials at the places where they prefer to go, closer to home.
Well said. Very well said. And I think this is a demonstration here of the value add as well as the charge, right, for all of us within this room. And as we think about next steps, what are those key questions, as well as why should pharma work with us, right? So thank you guys very much for all of that. Okay, so we'll move on in the agenda. Now we have our keynote speaker here, Dr. John Haymock. So Dr. Haymock is the chair of the thoracic and head and neck medical oncology at MD Anderson Cancer Center. He holds the David Burton Endowed Chair in Cancer Research. His research focuses on investigating mechanisms of therapeutic resistance to targeted agents, understanding regulation of angiogenesis in lung cancer, and development of biomarkers for targeted agents and immunotherapy. I could go on, but I'm summarizing his bio here. He's a PI of over 4 RO1s. He has a UO1 in small cell. He's also the MD Anderson PI for the Stand Up to Cancer ACS Lung Cancer Dream Team, and the leader of the Lung CCSG program, and co-leader of the Lung Cancer Moonshot program. And he is a physician scientist who also does a lot of mentorship also. So we're very lucky to have him here as a partner within and a leader within SWOG. And we look forward to his encore presentation from his plenary session at AACR, talking about the GN trial.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and thanks, Janelle, for the invitation to chat. This is a rapidly moving space, so really excited to talk about it. And since we've presented this, of course, we also have the keynote 671, and next week, Tina Cascone is going to be presenting the 77T study with nivolumab. So we're going to have 3 studies that are all positive in the perioperative space. So this is really an exciting time, and I think it's an important time for the cooperative groups, because you could think of this as sort of a reset of the entire space. You know, I actually brought a study called NeoStar here with Yan Liu a number of years ago that we discussed, and that was, you know, in the very beginning, and now we've sort of gone through a full round, and now it's time to think about the next set of studies that are coming through. Okay, so just a brief background. I think everyone here is familiar with this. Surgery remains the primary treatment with curative intent for patients with early stage non-small cell lung cancer. We have phase 3 studies that have demonstrated the benefit of immunotherapy either in the neoadjuvant or in the adjuvant setting, and now in the perioperative setting. And perioperative therapy could really improve long-term outcomes by combining the benefits and priming anti-tumor immunity when the tumor is in place, as well as giving sustained immunotherapy that could help prevent the growth of micrometastases. So AEGEAN is a randomized, placebo-controlled phase 3 study of perioperative durvalumab. And again, just to highlight the design here, it's resectable stage 2A to 3B, and this is using the AJCC 8th edition. You'll note some of the studies use the 7th, which will be relevant when you're trying to compare apples to apples. Patients could have lobectomy or sleeve resection as the planned surgery for it. And in the final modified ITT population, there were no EGFR or ALK aberrations allowed. which is also a difference between some of the studies. Now, they were initially included, but then when the ADORA study read out, it was felt that immunotherapy may not be the optimal therapy for patients with EGFR mutations, and at that point, the study was amended. 802 patients were randomized. 740 are the modified ITT, then excluding EGFR and ALK. And it was neoadjuvant chemotherapy with either durvalumab or with placebo. This is a fully placebo-controlled study, followed by surgery, and then either durvalumab for a year or placebo. All right, and we can discuss the statistical plans later, but the primary analysis involves the modified ITT population. There was an initial analysis of pathologic complete response on an initial cohort of 402 patients, and then the modified ITT for EFS. And what we're presenting here is the first interim EFS analysis. It's a pre-planned analysis, so it was the first opportunity that the study could be positive, and it was planned at 30% maturity. It's actually, maturity is a little higher than that. So this shows the baseline characteristics. The two arms are well balanced. The median age is about 65. The majority of patients are male. You can see here that more than 70% of the patients are actually stage 3, and actually about 50% of them have N2 nodal involvement. So that's important to keep in mind because some of the patients have different levels of N2 and 3 involvement, stage 3 involvement. So this has a relatively high percentage of N2 disease. About a third of the patients were PD-L1 less than 1%, and carboplatin was the planned regimen in more than 70% of patients. This shows the planned disposition. About 85% of patients ended up receiving 4 cycles of platinum doublet chemotherapy. About 81% underwent surgery in both arms, so durvalumab did not impact the ability to undergo surgery. Rates of R0 resection were slightly higher in the durvalumab arm at 94.7% compared to 91% in the placebo arm. And more than 60% of patients started adjuvant therapy. Now, at the time of this first interim analysis, 23% of patients are still receiving durvalumab or placebo. So in other words, the full benefits of the study treatment are not realized in the data that's presented here. So the study achieved its first primary endpoint of EFS with a hazard ratio of 0.68, corresponding to a reduction in the risk of an EFS event of 32%, a p-value of 0.0039. The median EFS was not reached in the durvalumab arm, but was 25.9 months in the placebo arm. And at the landmark analysis at 2 years, it was 63% in the durvalumab arm, 11% higher than in the placebo arm. Benefit was broadly seen across all the major subgroups. I'll point out a few subgroups here that benefit was seen across the stages, although numerically it was a bit higher in stage 3 disease. Note, because the study still is relatively immature, that lower stage disease takes longer to recognize those benefits. Benefit was larger as expected in patients with PD-L1 greater than 50%, but benefit was still seen in patients that were PD-L1 less than 1%, with a hazard ratio of 0.76 for that group. And numerically, there was less benefit observed in females, although the confidence intervals were quite wide, and they were only 29% of the population. Benefit was seen whether carboplatin or cisplatin was used as the planned regimen. The study achieved its second endpoint of pathologic complete response. The difference was 13% with a complete pathologic response of 17% in the durvalumab arm and 4% in the placebo arm. There's also a statistically significant increase in the major pathologic response from 33 versus 12%. And again, here, this is looking at the difference in the pathologic complete response. So if the point is to the left of the dotted line, that means the PathCR rate favored the durvalumab arm. Again, PathCR was broadly higher across all the major subgroups. I'll point out that the difference was larger for patients who were current smokers as compared to never smokers. and for patients with PD-L1 greater than 50% as compared to less than 1%, although in all these cases, there was still a higher pathologic complete response in the durvalumab arm. Now, this is data we didn't present in the initial AACR analysis, but we did present at ISLC. This is the EGFR group, so this is not in the modified ITT population. This was the group that was eventually excluded. And as expected, the benefit is markedly less in the EGFR mutant subgroup with the hazard ratio of 0.86 as compared to 0.68 in the modified ITT population. And again, with osimertinib as an option per the ADORA study, I think that tells us that PD-1 doesn't look like the right option there. And again, the difference in pathologic complete response, while it favored the durvalumab arm, the differences were smaller than that observed in the modified ITT population. Here's a summary of the adverse events. Rates of grade 3 or 4 toxicity were virtually identical between the two arms at 42% in the durvalumab arm, 43% in the placebo arm. And if you look at AEs attributed to study treatment, again, it was identical between the two arms at 32 versus 33%. Immune-related adverse events of grade 3 or 4 occurred just in 4% of the durvalumab arm and 2.5% of the placebo arm. And pneumonitis was observed in 3.8 versus 1.8% of patients. These are the most frequent adverse events represented as a tornado plot. They were largely similar between the two arms, with differences noted in rash and pruritus, although those were virtually all grade 1, 2. So just to summarize, perioperative durvalumab plus neoadjuvant chemotherapy significantly improved both pathologic complete response and EFS for patients with resectable non-small cell lung cancer versus neoadjuvant chemotherapy alone. Differences in the pathologic complete response were 13%. The EFS hazard ratio is 0.68 at this point, recognizing that it's not yet fully mature. So there's a median follow-up of 11 months in patients that were censored. So it continues to monitor for long-term EFS, DFS, and OS, and there'll be updates presented in the near future. They were largely consistent across the subgroups. EFS was observed regardless of which chemotherapy was used. And although it wasn't in the modified ITT, there was no clear benefit observed in the EGFR mutant subgroup, although this should be interpreted with caution given the small numbers. Perioperative durvalumab was associated with the manageable safety profile, consistent with the known safety profiles of the drug. And the addition of durvalumab did not impact the completion of neoadjuvant chemotherapy. Rates of R0 resection were actually slightly higher in the durvalumab arm. So in short, perioperative durvalumab plus neoadjuvant chemotherapy is a potential new treatment for resectable non-small cell. Thanks.
Outstanding. Thank you very much. All right, I think I should have, I maybe should have said this at the beginning. We're going to hold all questions to the end. We're going to move on to our debate, and then we're going to have a panel discussion.
Great.
Thank you very much. I think you have to technically go down the stairs that way if you want to have a seat. So we'll introduce the next speaker, sorry. We thought it'd be a little bit fun to do a debate of perioperative IO versus adjuvant chemo IO, and thank you to our debaters for agreeing to do this. We've really tried to make the panel very balanced across gender, across, we probably have to turn that off and wait till the end, across academic rank, across institutions, and there's a lot of it, and making this multi-D, so really appreciate that. So we have Dr. Sarah Goldberg, who is an associate professor of medicine in the Division of Medical Oncology at Yale. She is also the division chief for thoracic oncology and the research director for the Center of Thoracic Cancers at Yale Cancer Center. She also conducts multiple clinical trials and translational research on lung cancer with a focus on investigational biomarkers and novel treatment strategies. And her specific research includes EGFR mutant positive lung cancer, immunotherapeutics for lung cancer, and brain metastases. And with that, we'll have Dr. Goldberg.
Thank you so much. I agree that this is fun, and I appreciate that you had this idea to have this debate. I think it's something we all debate like every day in patient care, and so it's fun to try to think about how to put the arguments into a little bit of a more formal discussion. So I was tasked with this side of the debate. this side of the debate, which is pro-perioperative chemo immune therapy. And it's nice that Dr. Haymack went first and was able to show you all the details of the Aegean study, which really, I think, show you some of the key benefits of perioperative therapy. I also am going to talk about neoadjuvant therapy kind of merged into the perioperative space, since that's a similar strategy. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to show you, and just so you know, we have 6 minutes to do this, so it's a quick rapid fire discussion. So this is what I first wanted to show you, is that obviously the landscape has gotten very complex and full in terms of options that we have for resectable early non-small cell lung cancer. This is a slide from a discussion at ASCO from last year that shows that we have approved options in the neoadjuvant space with Checkmate 816, chemo plus nivo. We have 2 approved options for adjuvant immune therapy with atezo for PD-L1 positive patients and pembro regardless of PD-L1 status. And now we have several perioperative regimens, again, neoadjuvant plus adjuvant, that are looking extremely promising and I think probably will lead to approvals in the near future. So a crowded space, lots of different options. Of course, none of these regimens have been compared to each other. So how we interpret the data is really going to impact both what we do right now in terms of patient care and how we move trials forward. So first I wanted to show you a bit about the demographics of some of these patients and really just kind of the disease status that we're talking about. And John alluded to this earlier when he talked about the Aegean trial, is that these trials are really different. And I wanted to really drill down and try to show you how they're different in some key ways as we start to look at the data. And so on the left are the adjuvant studies, in the middle is neoadjuvant, and on the right are the perioperative studies. And I wanted to highlight, I'm just showing you a couple of very, very key things in terms of stage and PD-L1 status. What I wanted to highlight is something that he mentioned earlier, which is that for the adjuvant studies, the ones I've highlighted here, the majority of these patients, 60 or 70%, have stage 2 disease. This is the AJCC 7th edition, so it's a little complicated to compare across studies, but just you get the idea. Whereas with the neoadjuvant studies and the perioperative studies, actually about half or even the majority of patients have stage 3 disease. And actually, Aegean and Keynote 671, there are patients with 3B disease as well. So clearly a more advanced population of patients, advanced disease population of patients in the neoadjuvant and perioperative studies. And then when you look at nodal stage, which is a little easier to compare across studies because that didn't change between the different staging systems, again, as you would expect from the overall stage, less patients had N2 disease in the adjuvant studies. 21% had N2 disease, whereas in the perioperative studies, 40 to 50% had N2 disease. So again, clearly a more advanced stage in the perioperative and neoadjuvant studies. And then PD-L1, I would say this is about the same across studies, maybe some small differences, but overall they seem about the same in terms of PD-L1 expression. We can argue that later, but my interpretation is these are all about the same. So when you look at the background of who these patients are in the different trials, let's look at now how they compare in terms of a primary endpoint across the studies, which is event-free survival. So again, on the left are the adjuvant studies, the middle is neoadjuvant, on the right are the perioperative. And again, my takeaway from this is they're all about the same. You see the hazard ratios somewhere between 0.58 in Keynote 671 to 0.76 in Keynote 091. They're all statistically significant in terms of benefit of the approach that they're using in terms of event-free survival. And then I've just highlighted on the bottom the 2-year event-free survival, a little bit of differences across the studies, but they all show a clear 2-year event-free survival benefit. The data is not mature enough to go beyond 2 years, at least from what I can gather from the different studies, but of course that will be important to look at moving forward. So this is again from a discussion at ASCO, I think just nicely puts together the perioperative and neoadjuvant trials, just to show you in the Kaplan-Meier curves that all of these studies are showing a benefit for the immune therapy arm in terms of event-free survival. So this is my first conclusion for my talk. I have three conclusions to try to make this argument. This is my first conclusion. I think across the board, study after study, and John alluded to this also, we're going to see other studies coming forward in the next couple months, neoadjuvant and perioperative therapy clearly improves event-free survival. So now let's look at what one of the other potential benefits of perioperative or neoadjuvant therapy is, which is that we get a sense of the pathologic response, right? So you obviously don't get that with adjuvant therapy. The tumor comes out first. You have no idea about the activity of the drugs. And what I think you've probably all seen these curves before, but this is from the Keynote 671 study, just as an example. You've seen that it's those patients who have a pathologic complete response with neoadjuvant chemo pembro who really do extremely well. They have a really a prolonged event-free survival. They're not all event-free, but most of them are, clearly more than others. And so this is really, I think, another key benefit of perioperative or neoadjuvant therapy. And my second conclusion is that starting with neoadjuvant therapy, and I say may here, underlined, may allow some patients to get a limited duration of therapy. This is a key question. Do these patients who have this clear improved survival or improved outcomes compared to others, do they need the adjuvant therapy? An unanswered question, but something that I think is on a lot of our minds. Can these patients just get away with those 3 or 4 cycles of neoadjuvant therapy and not need the additional year of therapy? Unanswered, but very possible. So I wanted to turn to the surgical outcomes, alluded to a little bit earlier talking about Aegean, and this is actually also presented at World Lung from the Aegean trial, kind of a drilling down a little bit more into what happens at surgery. This is something that comes up a lot in our tumor boards when we talk about giving someone neoadjuvant chemoimmune therapy, and our surgeons say, but there's up to a 20% risk that patients don't get to surgery. So why is that? And in the Aegean study, they looked at this a little bit closer. I'm not sure you could see it. I could barely see it. But the gist is that there's a variety of reasons, really very few of which are because of side effects or toxicity from the durvalumab being added to the chemotherapy. I think it was 1% and the same across arms. And so there's a mix of reasons. Some of it is the patient's decision. Some of the patients do progress, but it doesn't seem to be very different between the immune therapy-based treatment and the chemo alone treatment. And so yes, 20% of the patients don't get to surgery in the study, but again, not different really between the immune therapy treatment and the chemo alone. And then just to show this as well, this is looking at the surgical outcomes. Again, they look about the same when you look at the durva-containing arm and the chemo alone arm. So when thinking about what is this issue with patients not getting to surgery, a key concern with neoadjuvant therapy, I went back in time to some old school neoadjuvant studies. I found some papers from the late 2000s, 2007, 2009. These are some of the big phase 3 trials looking at neoadjuvant chemotherapy. And what I wanted to highlight here, I was curious really, what were the rates of patients not getting to surgery in these studies, right? Is this something we've always known about? We just are now seeing it again. And this is really interesting. So these studies had surgery alone arms. And even in the surgery alone arms where patients were enrolled and went right to surgery, there still is a reasonable rate of no surgery. So on the left, that study showed surgery alone. There was a 7% risk of patients not getting surgery. And on the right, this study, no surgery alone, 6% of patients don't get surgery. And it really didn't seem so different if patients even got neoadjuvant therapy, maybe a little bit higher at 9%. And don't forget that these studies clearly showed us neoadjuvant therapy and adjuvant therapy, again, chemotherapy, had no difference in outcomes. So there is this concern about patients not getting to surgery, but I would argue it very well could be that it's patient selection. And then in these older studies, the patients had earlier stage disease, and I think we really have to look carefully at why those patients didn't get to surgery on the more modern studies and make sure that we understand that before we use that as an excuse to not use our treatment. Okay, and then this is my last comment here, which is overall survival. So even knowing that some of these patients aren't getting to surgery and that there may be concerns there, what about overall survival, right? Overall survival should take that into account. And so there's caveats when you look at overall survival in these studies. There's different patient populations. I already showed you that. The data is immature. You all know that. We haven't had enough time to really get enough events in this space. And then many of these studies actually don't have OS as a primary endpoint. But I still would urge you to look at these figures here. On the top are the two adjuvant studies, Empower 010 and Keynote 091. And you can see the overall survival curves there. On the bottom left is Checkmate 816, and the bottom right is Keynote 671. And I think, I don't know, I'm just looking at it. If you didn't know which Kaplan-Meier curve was associated with which study, which one would you want to be on? I think there's clearly a benefit that looks much more promising in that bottom half of the slide with the neoadjuvant studies. And so again, lots of caveats here. It's all still early days, but I think we really have to think carefully in this moment when we haven't compared the two strategies, which one seems superior. And I would say that my last conclusion here is you really can't argue with overall survival. And if we're starting to see benefit in the neoadjuvant approaches or perioperative approaches, that's something to take into account. And I think we just also, after I made these slides, we have a press release showing the OS benefit from the perioperative Pembro study. So here's my summary. Clearly, the neoadjuvant and perioperative therapy studies, many of them now, show a clear improvement in event-free survival. We may be able to allow some patients to get a limited duration of therapy if we start with neoadjuvant therapy. And then you can't argue with overall survival, and we're starting to see the suggestion that the perioperative studies may actually have an OS benefit that the adjuvant studies are not clearly showing. Thank you.
Thank you. And now for the other side, we have Dr. Barry Gibney, who is a general thoracic surgeon and associate professor at the Medical University of South Carolina. He's the section chief of thoracic surgery, program director of the Integrated Thoracic Residency, and the surgical director of the lung transplant program. He's a Paul Calabrese K-12 scholar in Hollings, and he works with his mentor, John Rangel, who I hear is not here because he's celebrating his birthday. So happy birthday, John, to develop a clinical trial concept for chemoimmunotherapy in the early stages. So you are the perfect person now, a surgeon, to counter the argument by Sarah. The floor is yours.
Okay, that's going to be hard to follow because I'm also on the neoadjuvant side, but I will do my best to argue the adjuvant side.
In the halls of debate, you pick your topic out of the pot. That's the way it works.
All right.
At least
so,
at the Ivy.
So, but first of all, I think it's important to understand why we are doing any of this. And the reality is that the survival of lung cancer is quite poor. And when we're talking about the population that we are looking at here, which is really the 1B to 3As, in the 8th edition of the AJCC staging, the survival at 5 years ranges between 36 and 70%. And just to put that into perspective, stage 3C breast cancer would have a 5-year survival of about 90%. So we have a huge room for improvement, which is why this space is so important. And whether it be neoadjuvant or adjuvant therapy, clearly we need something else other than just my knife. All right, so where do we come from? I think it's important to know the history so that we can understand where we are or how we got to where we are. And the LACE meta-analysis really provided the backbone of how we cared for patients with lung cancer, published back in 2008. And really the key part of this meta-analysis, summarizing 5 trials, is the fact that the use of adjuvant cisplatin-based chemotherapy was associated with a approximately 5% survival advantage when aggregated across all the studies. Not huge, but a very real benefit, and again, provided the standard of care really up until the past few years where we've had this giant paradigm change with immunotherapy. All right, so why do we think that adjuvant therapies are beneficial? Well, surgery and other traumas, such as surgery itself, are really known to be fairly immunosuppressive. So the resection of the cancer does still result in minimal residual disease, whether we can find it or not. It's likely there given those survival curves. And the effects of surgery upregulate a whole host of cytokines, chemokines, growth factors, which really function to expand the regulatory network of the immune system and thus actually provide a somewhat immunosuppressive tumor microenvironment. Now, the use of adjuvant chemotherapy has been shown to then kind of reverse some of those effects by enhancing dendritic cell activation, enhancing T cell activation, and making the cellular environment more sensitive to granzyme B, a cytotoxic agent from T cells. And this really primes the body for adjuvant immunotherapy, which may provide us with an understanding of why adjuvant therapy is beneficial. All right, so Dr. Goldberg did a really great job of going over the majority of trials that are out there. When we look at the adjuvant space, there are numerous trials that do exist, and they all follow kind of the same sort of paradigm of roughly stage 1B to 3A. Most of them are 7th edition. There's a few that are in the 8th edition. A few of them included EGFR mutations, and by and large, what they are is chemotherapy followed by a year of immunotherapy compared to chemotherapy followed by a placebo. There are a few interesting ones like the Mermaid trials, which are using minimal residual disease assays to try to determine how to administer adjuvant therapy. But by and large, it's roughly 4 cycles of chemotherapy followed by the year of immunotherapy. The 2 trials that have resulted or been published that we have are the Empower 010 trial and then the Pearls Keynote trial, which is where I will focus today. So specifically with the Empower 010 trial, the survival curves that were presented in the Lancet 2021 paper, interestingly, when they showed the survival curves, they go the most favorable from the top to the least favorable down at the bottom. The least favorable is the intention to treat group, with panel B in the middle being the group that was PD-L1 greater than 1%, and then the top one is the PD-L1 greater than 50%. But these disease-free survival overall showed an increase of of approximately 6%. But when we do the subgroup analysis, you find that the PD-L1 definitely stratifies things. If you're positive, your disease-free survival interval increased to 12%, and if it was greater than 50%, it was up to 25%. And then if they excluded the EGFR and ALK patients, there's even still more benefit. They have published their or at least reported on their 5-year overall survival, and the overall survival did show that there was an improvement, especially in that grouping of patients that was PD-L1 greater than 50%. And it's very easy for us to determine what the PD-L1 status is on a resected specimen. It's a little bit trickier on the pre-op biopsies, which is a big benefit of having surgery up front, is to get the tissue and get more ability to do a molecular analysis. A similar study is, or similar findings are seen in the Keynote 091 PEARLS trial, where again, disease-free survival increased. And the thing that was really beneficial about this one compared with the EMPOWER one was the improvement in disease-free survival happened irrespective of your PD-L1 status. So for the patients that were PD-L1 negative and not eligible for any immunotherapy in the EMPOWER trial, the use of pembrolizumab in the Keynote trial gives our medical oncology team another tool in the armamentarium to treat these patients following surgery. All right, so really why not neoadjuvant? And I think that really it centers around that discussion point of surgery. And there's a dictum to surgeons that nothing can't be treated by cold steel and warm lights. So I will kind of really try to sit on that as we go forward with this. And if you look at the EMPOWER 010 trial, and we highlight the consort diagram and blow this up here, of the patients that had surgery, 99% of them received some form of adjuvant therapy. But I'm going to go ahead and say that that's an irrelevant point because 100% of those patients received surgery. So to get into the trial, they had to have had resection. So we are not missing the opportunity to get these patients into the operating room. Now, unfortunately, those that start, only about 80% of them completed adjuvant therapy. But again, I'm going to fall back on they all got surgery, which again, we think is the standard for resectable lung cancer. How does this compare with the Checkmate 816 trial? Well, 35% of patients failed screening. And the failed screening means they really didn't highlight much in what resulted in that. There was actually fairly few that either had disease progression or unresectable disease after the screening component. But again, there was still a significant number of patients that were put into the trial that ultimately were deemed not eligible for some form of the neoadjuvant therapy. And then really the big part is that 17% of the patients failed to go to surgery. And when we look at the patients that failed to go to surgery, even those that did go to surgery, another 20% of them had delays to surgery. Now, most of it was only 2 to 4 weeks, but a large portion of patients either did not go to surgery or did not make their way or had delays in getting to surgery. And then when we kind of talk about, a big benefit of neoadjuvant is maybe you take the borderline resectable patient and make them resectable. Well, I don't really think that's borne out in the data either, because in the Checkmate trial, 17% of patients still needed a pneumonectomy to undergo an R0 resection. And that number is the exact same number that was found in the EMPOWER 010 trial. So I know we're going on to the panel, but I'll conclude with the benefit of the adjuvant approach is that it allows everybody to go forward with surgery, and it does not appear that the neoadjuvant approach it takes patients that are potentially unresectable or borderline resectable and makes them more resectable.
Thank you. Okay, so the panel's going to go down, and Janelle's moving down to moderate, and I'll introduce another panelist, Dr. Rachel Sanborn, full member of the Earl A. Childs Research Institute at the Providence Cancer Institute in Portland, Oregon. She's a medical director of the Thoracic Oncology Program and medical director of the Phase 1 Clinical Trials Program. And we're happy to have her join the panel. So please go down, Janelle. I am manning the chat. You want your phone? Yes. And please, anyone online, we have a good 25 people online. Please give me your comments. And now we're going to have a really raucous debate following the Robert's Rules of Order. And Janelle, the floor is yours.
Well, we're going to invite everybody to come up to the microphone and please bring your questions. I'll kick us off with one. So we talked about this, I think, a couple of times, and we heard this come up in some of the presentations. And I'm curious from this group, and maybe we'll we'll start with Dr. Sanborn, who's the maybe perhaps neutral party up here, about what do we do for those patients who get neoadjuvant chemo IO and they achieve a pathologic complete response? I'm curious, what are you doing in your clinics?
So I'm going to lodge a point of order that was unfair because I'm the one who posed that question to begin with. I don't know if is this microphone on?
Yes,
Okay.
it's on.
So I think that's really the one of the biggest outstanding questions that people come to me with, and particularly our thoracic surgery team has asked that question. And there are many that seem to take the implication that if a patient has a major complete pathologic response, then they're finished with their treatment. And certainly the curves look promising. However, with the gray hairs kind of combed in, we know that although thoracic oncologists are always optimists, the road is paved with humbling results later. And one of the fears that I have is of the ultimate drop off of the curves potentially, and are we calling it too early? So I tend to think about and favor a perioperative approach and a completion of therapy until we have things like better delineation of MRD, but I don't really know the answer.
Yeah, I view it same way, and I think in lung cancer we may be suffering historically from setting our expectations too low. So I think if you look at the patients who had a pathologic complete response, what you clearly see is they did better, and you look at that and you say, oh, that's great, they don't need more. But they're not cured, or many of them aren't cured. So if you look, the rates of recurrence, even if you had a pathologic complete response, are still way higher than, say, an early stage breast cancer. And don't forget, in breast cancer, they continuously made improvements by not saying, well, only 20% recurring, we're done, right? I mean, it's, just sort of bit by bit knocking that down. So if you look at the hazard ratio for the PathCR group for people for the Pembro versus chemo arm in Keynote 671, now it's not the perfect comparison because they weren't randomized after neoadjuvant, but if you look at that hazard ratio is greater than the overall population. In other words, it looks like patients, if you take that data at face value, got more benefit in terms of reducing their likelihood of recurrence, even though we all know they do better, but they still got more benefit from getting it. So I'm an advocate that they likely need that therapy, and it's a question that may get addressed ultimately by clinical trials. But right now, to me, the data looks like if it were my patient, I would want them to get the adjuvant part.
Okay. Yeah, so I know I made the argument that may be something we can look at in the future to decide, but I think where we are now is I agree with what's been said. We don't know, right? We don't have that data, but what do we do in the meantime until we know? And I think, as a lot of other things, it depends on the specifics. So how do they tolerate the neoadjuvant therapy? Did they have toxicity? In someone where you talk to them about, we don't really know. Some people will want it and some people won't, and I think that's reasonable to take into account. And then I think maybe the last thing that we haven't really talked about is the PD-L1 status. So for the adjuvant therapies, the benefit is really in the high PD-L1. So I don't know if we want to go back around the loop here, but do you take that into account? Someone who has a PathCR and has a high PD-L1 may be different than a PathCR, but PD-L1 0. So anyway, I think that those are all things to maybe think about in the time period where we don't really know whether it's beneficial.
I think those are really good points. And so we'll go to microphone one here, Dr. Al-Jamila.
Yes, so just want to kind of go over that and ask a few questions. So we had studies in the adjuvant setting, Empower 0 and 0 and Keynote 91 showing benefit, and then we had the neoadjuvant Checkmate 816 showing benefit, and then we have the perioperative studies. If we look at it, kind of like the idea and the field is going to perioperative or neoadjuvant, more perioperative. But if we look at it, hazard ratio for all these studies is in the range of about 0.6. Event-free or disease-free survival, depending on studies, is in the range of about 60%, 2 to 3 years, 60%. Overall survival, maybe there's some hint that the perioperative is better. But even if you look at the adjuvant study, overall survival is about 80%, so it's good. And comparing across studies, very hard to tell, and the data are immature. So I think we still don't know, and until we run a study and compare it in a study, we don't know. One other point that I'm afraid that we'll never know is, do we really need adjuvant immunotherapy after neoadjuvant chemoimmunotherapy? I think that will still be there. I mean, the idea of giving 3 to 4 cycles of chemoimmunotherapy while the cancer is there, new antigens are there, and do we really need a year? Do we need 6 months? I mean, this is.
Yeah, I think very good. I think those are great points, and I think this is one of the reasons why we wanted to have the debate and the panel discussions. There's a lot of questions that have been answered and still some that haven't been. Rachel?
Could I just build on that, in that instinctively one thinks that probably what it is not going to be a certain number that's going to be applied for all, but having us be able to understand what it takes to build effector memory generation within that particular patient, right? Mm-hmm. If we can develop the correct testing to say, how do you get T effector memory development for that patient, that's when they're finished.
We have a question from the chat, Janelle.
Oh, hold on. I think we'll get to that later. Dr. Haymock.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that, so would it be nice to know exactly the duration and so forth? It would, in the same way that for the Pacific study, we don't know that 9 months wouldn't be as good as 12 months. But I think here, if you're going to err on a side, I think when you have such high recurrence rates, I think it's a bigger error to say, well, let's focus on pulling back therapy. When you look at, the recurrence rates there, 2-year rates of 63%, even in our therapy arm. It's not like we're knocking it out of the park and now we can, let our foot off the gas. The other thing I'd point out is, and Sarah had a wonderful table up there that sort of compared the different groups, but the perioperative, one sort of burden that perioperative studies carry is that all the patients who drop off, around surgery time, before they get surgery, after surgery, and we know in every study there are patients who drop off, all of that is on your ledger when you've got a perioperative study. So they all count sort of against your hazard ratio because they happen in both arms. For a purely adjuvant study, you're not starting the clock until after they've completed surgery, recovered, patients have gotten adjuvant, and you're only comparing that group that made it through. Mm-hmm. So I think if you took a population and really sorted them out, I think there would be a bias that you'd be you'd be undercounting the benefits for the perioperative because, again, all those patients who drop out for other reasons are on your book.
Mm-hmm.
Good point.
Very good point. Why don't we go to microphone 2, and then we'll go to the question in the chat, and then we'll go to microphone 1.
Yeah, thank you for a great debate and panel. I was just curious what therapeutic choices you would do when patients progress, and does it depend on stage?
Who wants to take that? Dr. Goldberg?
So when a patient receives one of these approaches, neoadjuvant, adjuvant, and then progresses, yeah. I mean, again, another area that we don't fully know. So we're used to seeing a de novo metastatic patient who's obviously never had immune therapy, and so we don't really know. But I think it depends when, if it's during treatment, after treatment, how far after treatment. I think a patient that progresses during treatment, during neoadjuvant treatment, and that's obviously a concerning situation, and usually those patients, if they can, will go right to surgery. If they're progressing during adjuvant therapy, we typically will, use a second-line metastatic type regimen because they're still on treatment. If it's a period of time after they received their perioperative therapy, neoadjuvant, adjuvant, whatever it is, I think then you can think about a de novo metastatic type regimen that may include immune therapy. So it depends when. Bottom line. Yeah.
Okay, we have a question from Judy Johnson, our patient advocate. I'm actually going to preface it with my question because it's related, and my question was going to be for each of the panelists to tell us how their multimodality tumor board works and how at that board they discuss these different options, or how in the future they might discuss potential protocols. But what Judy asks is, since we don't know yet, it's important to have conversations with the patients to help them understand the choices and share the decision making. So sort of related, how do we discuss it among ourselves first? How do we bring the patient in? How are we going to think about protocols? This is something that might be relevant here at the committee in the next few months.
Yeah, we've got a multidisciplinary team that meets. Now we all meet virtually, to go through these. But I think historically we've had a heavy reliance on neoadjuvant regimens for a lot of the reasons that Sarah outlined. I agree that you want to discuss these with patients. These are challenging discussions, and I think there's a default really simple discussion that people often come in with, that they said, well, I talked to a surgeon, he said we could just cut it out, we shouldn't let it sit around spreading. And so you're often starting against that background argument to, sort of explain, well, what might be the rationale. And that's challenging in the setting of how long molecular profiling really takes. I think molecular profiling is one of the biggest challenges we face because it's often just really slow. And I hate having an early stage patient sitting around for 4 or 5 weeks waiting for EGFR and ALK. So that's an area that we definitely need to improve on.
So we also have a virtual multi-specialty chest conference. We have two meetings weekly, and when patients are undergoing diagnostic workup, they're presented. So many times then the referral goes simultaneously to med-onc thoracic surgery, and then also rad-onc if surgical resection is questionable. And then they're having those discussions with all teams.
We also have a multidisciplinary tumor board, and our clinic is a multidisciplinary clinic where pulmonary, med-onc, and surgery all see patients at the same time. So it does foster a lot of these communications between our group. I think one thing I would want to highlight to everybody in here, especially as SWOG does capture not only the academic cancer centers, but also community sites, is something Dr. Haymock just mentioned, that the surgeon says we can just cut it out and we don't want it to spread. Speaking as a surgeon, I think that the thing that we don't recognize is that about 80% of lung cancer care is performed by not general thoracic surgeons, by cardiothoracic surgeons, and by general surgeons. And the reason that's important is they honestly may not even know that these trials exist, or they may have fear over this is an unresectable thing, or I can't operate after chemotherapy. And or they may do a bad surgery. We know that through NCDB analyses that 50% of wedge resections are done with a positive margin or no lymph node status. So I think I'm going to use this to plea to everybody to go back to your institutions that you have to foster these relationships with your surgeons, because a lot of them either don't know or are fearful or are going to do the wrong thing for the patient. So it is crucial whether you have a formal multi-D process or not. You have to have these communications, because at least in our center, they come to me first, and I think I'm thoughtful enough to sit there and say this person should go talk with, my medical oncologist or my radiation oncologist. I know I have biases as a surgeon, but I don't think that there's everybody that thinks like me. So that's my plea to everybody based off of that.
What about the patient? Do you talk to the patient about different options, or do you just take back the recommendation right to them?
Oh, I absolutely talk with them about neoadjuvant. So it depends if they come to me and let's say it's a stage 3A patient. And they're in my clinic, I talk with them about Checkmate, which is our preferred approach, but I also talk with them about the Empower approach. And essentially my kind of discussion with them is, I prefer the induction therapy approach because, yes, there are people that don't get to surgery, but I think that it's a biologic stress test to some degree. So it lets me know a little bit more about tumor biology and whether you would benefit from my operation. And 2, it's 3 cycles as opposed to a year of therapy afterwards with 4 cycles of chemotherapy. But the benefit being that we take you directly to surgery, and I know I can take this out right now. And then I answer their questions. I mean, my visits with the patients that are new patients end up being typically close to an hour or so, where we are having these conversations and consenting them through the whole process, which is why my flow through clinic score is like at 50% of my patients being happy, because it's very delayed there. But I think it's really crucial to have these conversations.
But you get a good press scanning review.
All right, and Sarah, what are your
I don't know that I have too much more to add. I will just say in our multidisciplinary discussions, especially our surgeons, I would say, think differently about the stage 2s versus stage 3s, which we haven't really talked too much about. I think there's a lot more comfort with doing a neoadjuvant approach for a stage 3, where we know the risk of systemic progression is so high. In stage 2s, I feel like there's a little more nuance there, and especially node negative stage 2s, I think our surgeons sometimes just say, let's just get it out and figure it out later. So I think there's still a lot of discussion, especially around the stage 2s in our tumor board, about whether neoadjuvant is appropriate.
Great. All right, thank you guys. Okay, so we'll go to, we got 3 questions left, and then we have to move on.
Well, then we're going to do a vote. We're
One.
going to do a vote.
Oh, and then we have the vote.
So,
Get ready.
Comment, then my question. So John, sounds like you're advocating for a trial that starts the clock at the same time. So everybody enrolled, one group gets a neoadjuvant, another group goes to primary section. Then this issue of conjecturing why, what happened, did you lose, go away. Maybe that's what you're advocating there?
And there's a study proposed, as we saw yesterday, that's comparing neoadjuvant or perioperative versus just a pure adjuvant approach. I'll highlight the one place I'm aware of with immunotherapy and chemotherapy, or with the recent therapies that's been compared, is it's a SWOG study, I believe, for melanoma, where they directly compare perioperative versus purely adjuvant, and it was a blowout. It wasn't even close. Now, I know melanoma is different and so forth, but so it's certainly a question that could be asked. I think a good question is that the question that's the best use of our resources. So I'm not. This isn't to say it's settled, but it's to say that we have to pick which question is going to be the most important one. I like the concept of approaches to intensify the non-path CR group. If I had to pick one question I would love for us to settle, that non-path CR group has such a high rate of recurrences that testing new strategies to intensify them feels like the most important to me, but people can disagree, about what to ask.
I think there's lots of important questions.
So my question is about we know the staging system is going to change. That's been announced now, right? We're going to split N2 into N2A, single station, and N2B, multi-station. So in Aegean, you had almost 50% N2s. Interesting, Nadim 2 has almost 70-something% like that. Are you able to tease out in your data set what the proportions were, N2A versus N2B? Do you guys have that detail?
Oh, you got me. I don't even know what N2A and B mean for the new staging
Single
system
station
yet.
versus multi-station.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it was roughly half, I believe, were multi-station. I think that number is being firmed up, so don't quote me exactly, but I think roughly half were multi-station. And Sarah, did a great job of pointing out that there's differences, in terms of the N2 status. Keynote 671 had 42%, but some of the other studies had 20%, of N2 disease. We had a debate yesterday about can we convert operable patients in stage 3? Well, a lot of them would be considered inoperable at some sites, inoperable in others. So this is, and obviously they were operable if they, ended up going on the study. So I think this is a really important area, the N2 positive patients, about how to optimally handle them. I think this is a really key area.
All right, we're going to go to microphone 2 and then 1, and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you. Great discussion. There's a sizable and growing population of patients we see in the community who come in getting therapy with immune suppressive drugs for their inflammatory bowel disease or their psoriatic arthritis or the rheumatoid arthritis or other conditions, or they may have had an organ transplant previously and they continue on immunosuppressive. None of these patients would have been in these trials. But how do you decide on neoadjuvant chemoimmunotherapy versus surgery, and then a decision about post-op adjuvant therapy in those patients?
Take that.
Happy to take it.
Yeah.
Okay. So we don't know what the right answer is for these patients because they were excluded. I guess in my own practice, I worry if we give neoadjuvant therapy to someone at high risk of toxicity, which is basically any of those patients you just described, that they may really not get to surgery. So I probably wouldn't choose neoadjuvant therapy for someone at higher risk because of an autoimmune disease or a transplant, for sure. Whether they should get adjuvant, I guess it depends on the severity of their autoimmune disease, a similar discussion that we have in patients with metastatic disease. I'm curious if others disagree with that. That's just been my practice. I would just worry about them not getting to surgery if they had like a huge flare of their IBD or whatever.
Yeah, I would do something similar. You know, Mark Awad and colleagues published a really nice analysis of patients treated with immunotherapy who had immune-related autoimmune toxicities that were considered sort of manageable. So psoriasis, rheumatoid arthritis, and a list like that. And in some cases, it did induce flares, but in all cases, it could be managed with steroids. So I tend to offer to patients and discuss it if it's psoriasis, or, arthritis, or a handful of other things that are reasonably manageable, and we know we can come back with steroids. I avoid it for things like MS or organ transplant, where I'm really afraid of what might happen personally.
I agree. I think that you have to look at your relative risk of dangerous IO toxicity depending. So transplants and things like MS are in a different category than psoriasis, for example.
It's a good time to get your inflammatory bowel GI docs involved.
Yep.
For patients that are not on immunomodulators with inflammatory bowel disease, I usually send them for a scope with one of them to have them assess the severity, and then we make a decision. And we also have taken it for any of the patients that have rheumatologic disorders. They get an automatic rheumatology consult if they have locally advanced cancers, to have that rheumatologist weigh in on the risk of immunotherapy in that patient population.
That's a great point. Really good question. Thank you for your question. All right, microphone one, last question, and then we'll wrap up.
My name is Leighton from Fred Hutch. So as of today, we only have FDA-approved 3 cycles before the surgery. So we had the anticipation of a more perioperative approach with the 4 cycles before surgery approved. So say if you decide that perioperative approach is the option for the patient, would you do 3 or 4 cycles for the patient, and how would you make that discussion with patients?
Wants to take that one.
So, so historically, the standard for adjuvant in all the adjuvant trials required 4. But if you look at ALT, for example, they said you had to have at least a minimum of 3. So I think 4 was what we considered, or shoot for 4 and settle for a minimum of 3 to be considered standard. And that was the rationale in AEGEAN. Now, nobody's compared 3 versus 4. I doubt the differences are huge. But surprisingly, there was a Chinese study where they compared 2 versus 3, and that there was a really big difference there. So unless you posit that 3 is the perfect number and there's no more benefit for the 4th, I guess I lean towards 4, but I'm quick to drop the 4th if people are getting beaten up, is the approach I take.
Okay, while they're talking, we're moving to the poll. Thank you very much. We're going to have time for the panel at the end. You can talk to them in the back, but thank you, panel, for a wonderful job.
Very much. That's outstanding.
No.
I just only wanted
Could we get the projector?
specialists in the communities in which they practice. So it would always be nice to have recommendations for those of us who practice in under.
That's fantastic. Understood. That's a great point. Could we, projectors back on.
Okay, so let's do the poll. You joined by the web. You all know how to do this. pollv.com/SWOG2023. And join by text. You can do a text. That might be the easier thing to do. Let's all vote one now, realizing that many people might want to say depends. But let's do it, okay? Even if you don't see patients, just vote. You've heard the debate. We need to determine who gets the prize, the big prize. Okay.
1 or 2 or 3, right? Yeah.
I don't know, but we're not having a good voter turnout here, Janelle. And 3, 4, 5, 6 people have voted. This is Chicago afternoon. This is where all the voting problems started years ago. We used to always say Chicago, watch out. That was a great debate, and There'll be a lot of data at the ESMO meeting next week.
Is Karen online?
Yeah, Karen Redcam, stand ready. You got 2 presentations coming? 3? Okay, well, the excitement is just killing me here. Okay, so in the early returns, and I think we're going to have to move on to the next, we have perioperative chemo IO, which is, of course, what's the standard right now and approved, but we have adjuvant chemo followed by IO. A few, I guess, maybe people save that for the mutated space. The ALINA trial is going to be presented at ESMO for ALK. So, and then there is the neoadjuvant chemo. What does it say? Neoadjuvant chemo IO alone. So, so we'll see. I think the perioperative seems to be the one that people are favoring, and we will update on this at the end of the meeting. But now let's move on to the next part of the meeting. So now we hear about ongoing studies, correct?
Yes. Excellent. All right. So Karen, I think you are Dr. Redcamp. Get kicked off here.
I'm here.
Been here.
Awesome. Just joining us.
So I think we've had a lot of discussion already, and I thank Paul and Lucy for discussing this earlier, the Pragmatica lung trial. Again, this is our prospective randomized study of ramucirumab plus pembrolizumab versus standard of care. This is our pragmatic trial where we are simply looking at overall survival and high-grade unexpected grade 3 and grade 3 and 4 and all grade 5 adverse events. Again, Arm A standard of care is dealer's choice. To date, we have that when I submitted the slides, it was 138, and today I looked, it was 164. So we have robust accrual, and I have to thank all of the support that we are getting. We have champions across the NCTN. We have our operations team in the background. We have the lung community engagement subcommittee that is highly engaged, and our patient advocate and Lucy Ganzauer, and all of this support has helped the enrollment to go relatively very quickly. And next slide. And again, just reminding you, this is a pragmatic study. Everybody's asking for simpler studies. This is an example of where we have gone very simple, limited eligibility criteria. It's focused on stage, prior therapy, performance status, and safety, enrollment and treatment of patients as we do in the real world. We don't have we have only a handful of lines on our study calendar. We don't have standard labs. We don't have imaging or RECIST that are required. Next slide. And again, for data capture, the burden on our sites, people have been discussing staffing as an issue about opening studies. This significantly minimizes the data collection burden. We have reduced time points, reduced number of forms, and significantly reduced number of data elements. No imaging is required, no imaging assessments, no labs that get entered into the system, no specimen collection. Very unexpected AEs in all grade 5 AEs. So we expect that there's probably 90% fewer AEs that will be reported. No con meds, which is kind of a dream, I think. And then so with that reduced data to monitor and audit, we're actually using some of these funds to increase our representativeness. Next slide. And this is just showing you that was the number of forms. So we're actually, go ahead. Thank you. So we have a special focus on trying to increase representativeness. You've heard from Lucy, you've heard from Paul, and again, we appreciate their outreach and connection with the NCORPs. So we have made specific contacts, and we're working with MMG and have a paid consultant who is working to help reach out to sites that have historically underrepresented populations in their group, trying to open them, trying to get resources to them so that they can get patients onto this trial. Next slide. And again, we have patient-friendly materials. We have resources for the sites that are on the CTSU website. So please take a look and see, but we're trying to make this as easy as possible for patients to understand, for sites to open, and for sites to conduct. And I want to thank everybody behind the scenes who have worked tirelessly to make this work. And we're happy so far with the success of the accrual and hoping to see some of the effects of improving our diversity in trials with this study.
Outstanding. Thank you so much, Dr. Redkamp. We'll keep it going in the interest of time to the master protocol.
So again, we've also talked about the master lung map protocol and those successes. So we continue to open and screen for patients. We'll go to the next slide. We talked about the representativeness paper, and again, this is an example of how the NCTN and SWOG has been at the forefront of trying to increase diversity. As Mary stated, this started almost a decade ago, and these are the benefits of thinking about, strategically thinking about how we want to be more inclusive in clinical trials. Next slide. Our current schema is shown here. The open trials right now, we only have two match sub-studies that are open. It's S1900E, which is KRAS G12C with co-mutations, and then the S1900G, which is for patients with EGFR mutation and acquired MET resistance, and it's capmatinib, osimertinib, ramucirumab versus capmatinib, osimertinib. We have a number in the pipeline that hopefully will be opening. Some will be opening soon, and we are always working to get an unmatched sub-study to make sure that more patients have the ability to go on to this trial. We are looking to increase the platforms of NGS panels used, and so that will hopefully open up the eligibility and increase the enrollment in the next year. Next slide. Again, we've been open across the country with significant number of patients and samples that have been submitted and patients on trial. And this is again, a study that's been open for a decade now, and it's really an amazing resource. So if you have questions to ask this database, this may be a place to start looking at kind of sub-studies and sub-analyses. And I would suggest that you get a hold of myself, Dr. Borgai, or our TM lead, which is David Cozano, and see if we might have projects that might be reasonable. Next slide. And then I will discuss S1900E, and this is on behalf of Dr. Suki Pata and David Gerber, the study chairs for this study. And again, this is sotorasib in patients with recurrent KRAS G12C non-small cell lung cancer. All patients receive sotorasib, but they are put into cohorts based on their co-mutations, TP53 mutations, STK11 mutations, and other. We are looking for responses and progression-free survival. Next slide. To date, we have 101 of 116 participants enrolled, 44 in the TP53, 22 STK11, and 35 others. So we are close to completing this enrollment and hope over the next few months we will do this. We have looked at race and ethnicity in this trial. We have about 10% Black patients in this trial, fewer Asian as might be expected. And as we discussed, the Hispanic numbers remain low. But we're excited to see this and try to understand the co-mutations. Next slide. Again, we talked about available slots, and the TM proposal to evaluate ctDNA has been submitted so that analysis can be done once the enrollment is complete. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And we'll invite Dr. Goldberg up to talk about S1900G.
Okay, thank you. So S1900G is now open. It opened a few months ago, and I'm really excited about it. We've already had some nice activity, which I'll show you in a minute. So to remind you about this study, this is a study that's a bit unique for LungMap. It's the first EGFR mutant-specific study in LungMap so far. So it's for patients with advanced EGFR mutant lung cancer who are progressing on osimertinib and have MET amplification as a mechanism of resistance. And they're randomized to the triplet of capmatinib, a MET inhibitor, plus osimertinib, and plus ramucirumab. or capmatinib and osimertinib alone. So everybody gets the EGFR and the MET inhibitor, and the randomization is to ramucirumab or not. And the primary endpoint here is progression-free survival. So I just wanted to take a second to talk about the biomarker identification because it's been a source of some questions and wanted to clarify a few things for people. So EGFR mutations have to be identified at baseline. That's why the patient's getting osimertinib in the first place. But MET amplification as a mechanism of resistance is something that's detected at the time of progression on osimertinib. There are a few ways you could detect MET amplification for the study. You can do tissue-based testing through the standard lung map procedure. And that means you can either submit tissue and lung map will test it using the Foundation platform that they use, or you can do Foundation tissue testing on your own and submit those results. The other option for these patients is that if you do your own local testing at the time of progression on osimertinib, you could submit those results. And that could be tissue testing with any CLIA assay or blood-based testing using Guardant or Foundation. So if you do that as standard of care, blood-based testing to look at mechanisms of resistance, if you find MET amplification, that result can be submitted for lung map. Hold on. Oh, I think that was it. Okay, I was gonna give you an update, or maybe that's at the very end, but the update is we're starting to see some nice activity. We have a few patients on already. We just consented 2 patients at my site, which we're very excited about, and always open to answer questions. So if you, any questions come up about screening, always happy to answer them. Should we do the poll or are we running too low on time? Want to do it? Okay, polls are fun. Okay, so I created a poll. So if you have not yet put a patient on the trial, and only like a few people have, so you probably haven't, why not? Is it because you don't have it open, which we could talk about why or why not you don't have it open? Do you not routinely test for MET amplification, so it's not really relevant for you? You didn't realize that LungMap even had a sub-study for EGFR since it's a new thing. Is it that you have patients with EGFR mutant lung cancer, but you just haven't found a MET amplified patient yet? Maybe they weren't eligible for some other reason, which I'd love to hear about, or some other reason. Okay. So a couple people have answered, you don't have it open, so think about opening it. It's more common than you might think. About 20% of patients with EGFR mutations will have MET amplification as a mechanism of resistance. And then you haven't found one. Keep looking, lots of ways to test, blood, tissue, etc. That's all. Oh, these are the updates I already told you. Oh, we have an FAQ document, so you can look at that as well. 6 patients, not all treated, but 6 patients that have enrolled. Awesome, randomized. Thank you, Mary. So 6 compared to 2 just like a few weeks ago when I put these slides together. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody, for helping with all of our accruals to our trials. And we'll go to Dr. Rustovan, who is joining us virtually to give us an update on the Maverick study. Dr. Rustovan?
Thank you. So this is the SWOG S1827 trial, the Maverick study. And this is a trial for patients with small cell lung cancer where we're enrolling both limited and extensive stage lung cancer patients. All patients receive active brain MRI surveillance and they're randomized 1-to-1 to PCI versus no PCI. The brain MRI schedule is every 3 months during year 1 and every 6 months during year 2, and hippocampal avoidance PCI is allowed. Currently, the primary endpoint is overall survival with the non-inferiority design, and our key secondary endpoint is cognitive failure-free survival. Next slide. So in terms of importance, the Maverick study is the first ever randomized trial looking at brain MRI surveillance plus or minus PCI for limited stage small cell lung cancer. And for patients with extensive stage, there's conflicting overall survival data from randomized trials, and so Maverick will be critical to resolving that controversy. In terms of status updates, the trial was activated in January of 2020. And as of now, the accrual is at 182, which is a sizable amount for a PCI randomized trial, but still below our target accrual goal. Our total accrual goal currently is 660 due to our large non-inferiority trial design. On a positive note, the accrual seems to have picked up this year, and we've been averaging about 7 patients per month over the last 6 months. So that's been encouraging. And but still, we think that we're probably unlikely to reach that high accrual goal ultimately. And so to address that, we are in discussions with the NCI about a proposed change in the primary endpoint to our ongoing cognitive failure-free survival endpoint. And we propose that that would allow us to reduce the accrual goal to about 250, with the hypothesis that brain MRI surveillance alone without PCI would have superior cognitive failure-free survival. And so we have gotten some feedback on that from the NCI, and we still need to work out some of the specifics on that. But if we're able to successfully change the accrual goal, 250 patients would take us approximately another year to accrue all the patients at our current rate. And that would be a good number at 250. It would put us right kind of in the middle of the two landmark trials in the PCI space, which accrued 224 and 286 respectively. And so we're hopeful for that, and that the results should still be practice defining. And I want to take the opportunity to thank people who have the trial open. Please do continue to offer this trial to your patients. We do think that this will have a very important effect on practice going forward. Next slide. And so just briefly, I wanted to also give an update about the sister trial to this study. This is a SWOG endorsed trial that's through the NRG CC009. And this is also a trial in patients with small cell lung cancer, but in this case with known brain metastases. And so this is a randomized phase 3 trial of stereotactic radiosurgery versus hippocampal avoidant whole brain radiation for patients with 1 to 10 brain metastases from small cell. And so here you can see the randomization, patients with brain metastases receiving radiosurgery or hippocampal avoidant whole brain radiation. This is the first phase 3 trial to look at radiosurgery alone in patients with small cell. And so this has very important implications for practice and will help define the role of upfront radiosurgery for small cell patients. The accrual goal is 200 patients. The primary endpoint is time to cognitive failure. The study has accrued 58 patients so far, which is also a good number and the largest trial of its kind in this space, but we still have a ways to go. And so I appreciate you keeping this trial in mind. If you're interested in opening it, please feel free to email me. My email's listed on the slide there. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. With that, we'll have Dr. Al-Jamali give us an update on S1933.
Yeah, so SWOG 1933 is a pilot study of hypofractionated radiotherapy followed by atezolizumab consolidation in patients with stage 2 and 3 non-small cell lung cancer. So the target patient population is stage 3 patients with performance status 2 and stage 2 patients who are not surgical candidates. So this is a patient population we don't have data that guide treatment decision, and patients receive hypofractionated radiation therapy, 60 gray and 15 fractions, 3 weeks, and then have scans, and if no clear evidence of disease progression, then they get atezolizumab consolidation for 1 year, so no chemotherapy on this study. We are at this point, we can't move it to the next one. Does the green one? Yes. The study is open 107 institutions. We are at 30 patients out of 47, so 2/3 through the enrollment. So just encourage everybody to this patient population is there. So the stage 2 patients who are not surgical candidates, stage 3 patients for various reasons, COPD, cardiac disease, not they have borderline performance status. So just remember this patient population, please, when you see them. Let's try to enroll finish enrollment next 17 patients. So we have some data on this patient population that can help us. The challenge has been, I screened good number of patients, enrolled some, find those patients who are not surgical candidate, borderline performance status, but still DLCO of 50%, so a reasonable lung function to, so they can tolerate the radiation. So this has been the challenge for me, but, please remember to screen patients. And,
perfect.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right. We're almost there. We're gonna, Dr. Park already presented this. Yep, he did this in his session. Thanks. Yep, you're good. We got it covered. Thank you, though. She was going to cover Dr. Daly, but we had Dr. Park talk about that study earlier. So Dr. Chang asked me to talk to you guys also about Insignia, just to getting close to closing out here. I think most of us are familiar with this study. It's really a partnership with ECOG and SWOG. And just remind everybody, it's just really about a sequencing study in the first line. The team's done an outstanding job. I want to kind of go to this section here. So the next steps within this study are really, the team has gotten together to work on the BIQ application for all the tissue and biopsy, the tissue as well as the blood specimens that they've collected. And so I want to thank the team for working on this and getting the application. I believe that working on it, and it's due in March, if I'm not mistaken. And they're really going to look at IHC, multiplexing, quantitative immunofluorescence, DNA and whole exome sequencing and RNA profiling as long as tissue allows. We're really waiting to hear back from the ECOG bank about what we have on which patients so we can finalize the application. Dr. Kurt Schalper has been working as well as with Roy and I, as well as the PIs of the study, and Julie Bramer over at ECOG to get this process through. This is one of the key portions that SWOG is taking the lead on within this study. You can see that depending on which question we have asked that we will need some pretty substantial amount of tissue. So getting that information from the ECOG bank is going to be very critical to moving this forward. We do have the amendment that has recently been approved for this as well. And we have reduced the sample size and we're very close to completing accrual. So congratulations to all of the PIs of the open studies. Hopefully we'll have some more. No, you're not allowed to say anything, Roy. Yes, Roy.
Well, before she concludes, I just wanted to say accrual is just so critical. You know, so few people go on clinical trials, and we heard today about how our trials are getting out to representative populations. In the lung map, right now we're suffering from the unexpected early closure of a non-matched sub-study. That said, we do have the Pragmatica, which is accruing well, and that can serve as that, even though they're not in the same trial. So screen for lung map. And the other thing I just wanted to add is we need ideas. Haas Borgai was here yesterday. Karen's on the phone. We had a number of lung map meetings. We need ideas of sub-studies, agents that are going to work in the IO refractory population. We need biomarker-driven studies. So scour the areas that you're at, your labs, all of the investigators, because bring those to us because there's lots of opportunity. So that's what I wanted to say, Janelle.
Perfect. So I want to also say thank you to all of you for joining us in person as well as virtually. We do look forward to seeing you in Seattle, not San Francisco, Seattle. And I want to give a special thanks to our keynote speaker, Dr. John Haymock, as well as our debaters, as well as our panelists. It was a really interesting session. Just want to remind everybody, it's this 30 Year of Hope. And so this is, those savvy enough with the QR codes, please donate. This is really critical to supporting multiple areas. You hear about our subgroups, all the infrastructure that we have to build out, and getting, especially getting junior investigators, I think, through the system here. So this is some stories also here. You've seen the booklet. Please pick up one, really inspiring stories about what we can all do when we work collectively together with a shared purpose. And, just feeding off of what Roy has highlighted here and what has been mentioned, again, when you go back to your institutions, please, we have multiple subcommittees, we have multiple projects coming down the pipe. We're looking for ideas. Please engage your junior faculty members, bring them, introduce them to me, have them email me. I meet with people all the time and help match them to different protocols and projects. And there's also funding for them that goes back to them as well as to your institution. So with that, we'll end the meeting, and thank you so much, and safe travels, everybody.